started. We might have a few more people join, but we'll let them catch up. So I just want to say welcome everyone to our webinar on key considerations and best practices for your NetSuite implementation. My name is Lyndsey Bunting. I'm one of the co-founders of Blue Onion. We're so excited to have you all here. This is honestly a topic that we get a lot of questions about and wanted to bring together some of the best in the business to share their experiences and learnings. And we also want to make sure, that this is really helpful for everyone listening. So we'll be breaking down our questions into 3 different sections. And are going to ask Nick and LaVette to really try and provide, super tactical recommendations and learnings that they can share with the group. And so the sections of the questions basically will be getting ready for an implementation. So even like pre-implementation, things to be thinking about, some tips and tricks during the actual implementation. And then as LaVette and I were just chatting about before the call, sort of post-implementation success and what does that look like? Because it doesn't really end at go live. So please ask questions at any time by typing them into the chat box. We'll be sure to answer as many as we can, and we'll also leave time at the end as well for additional Q&A. And so I think let's just kick it off, and I'd love to maybe have each of our panelists share a little bit about themselves and sort of their experience with NetSuite. So LaVette, maybe I'll kick it to you first.
Sure. LaVette Strickland, working for Sunday Riley Modern Skincare right now, currently. I started with NetSuite in 2005. And I'm going to say honestly before that, because it wasn't NetSuite when we started using it. I think it was called like NetLogic or something like that. And I was an end user. I loved it because I thought, great, NetSuite's great. It's awesome because it's customizable. Worked for several small companies at first, and then went to a larger agricultural geopositioning company, stayed there for 6.5 years, working for 13 retail stores. Yeah, it was a lot, and everybody had their opinion, and everybody wanted what they wanted in their department, and had to bring those teams together so that we had one system, one unified goal. And then left there after 6.5 years because they moved on to Oracle's competitor. And then I started working for Sunday Riley Skincare, and here I am now today.
Awesome. Nick, you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. First, Lyndsey, thank you very much for having me. Happy to be with you guys today. So Nick Stuart from RSM. RSM is an audit, tax, and consulting firm. We do have a NetSuite practice. That is one of the leading NetSuite practices that implements NetSuite. I am part of our solution architect team. I do focus specifically in the consumer products and apparel spaces. I came from industry, so I worked on NetSuite as an operations manager, went through some NetSuite implementations and e-commerce implementations that connected to NetSuite. And then enjoyed it so much that as we finished and stabilized, I moved into consulting about 7 years ago, and have been really focused on the consumer product space and working with companies in those industries to implement NetSuite, as well as optimize and support NetSuite users with any initiatives that they do have. And certainly happy to join you guys today.
Thanks, Nick. And Brian, I'll let you introduce yourself too.
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Brian Webb. I work here at Blue Onion. I have the fortune of working with people like Nick and LaVette through our product, but previously I worked at a Big 4 firm doing tax work, was a controller at a few different high-frequency hedge funds, which is really where I think a lot of my work translates into the NetSuite world. We did millions of transactions through the GL systems that we were using, and figured out how to kind of solve problems once on a systematic level. And so that's the experience that I've brought here to Blue Onion is trying to make sure that we look at systems from a systematic perspective and solve problems from a systematic perspective. And so seeing that experience in our work through NetSuite and a lot of people trying to have high volumes of orders running through that system and trying to solve problems that way. So great to be here with everyone.
Awesome. All right, guys. All right, let's just jump right in. So pre-NetSuite, what are, we have, and just to give you guys some context, we have companies in sort of the audience and also that we work with that are sort of at every stage. So they're thinking about going to NetSuite, they're in the process of implementing, their posts go live and still trying to work things out. So maybe specifically within sort of this like pre-NetSuite or key considerations, sort of thinking about moving on to NetSuite. LaVette, maybe we'll start with you. What are some of the key factors that you think maybe are important for companies to consider before deciding to implement a NetSuite instance?
Oh, let's see. One of the key factors is NetSuite for you? Most importantly, because NetSuite is not for every company, but is NetSuite for you, depending on the kind of business that you're running. Is the platform going to work for you? And I want to say that from this perspective, because you see a lot of NetSuite, advertisement everywhere that it's the #1 ERP. And that might be true for the position or for the industry that you're in, but NetSuite is not for everyone. And one of the key factors I think you need to consider is what type of business are you? And what is it that your end goal is? What are you looking for to get from your ERP? If it's mostly reporting, you might want to consider that. If you're looking at, is NetSuite going to provide every single detail for me in my business? You might want to consider that. It cannot without customization. Those are key factors I think a business needs to look at, and making sure that you're for the platform, one, yes, but the platform is for you as well, for your business.
Awesome. And Nick, also because you obviously are talking to companies a ton too, as they're trying to make that NetSuite decision. Sort of what are some of the things that you think would be helpful for people to think through as they're going through that decision?
Yeah, I think, a lot of companies are coming to that question typically from the technology side, saying, what technology can we implement to help solve and automate certain problems that we have? How do we scale is usually a common question. I think establishing the value of that technology stack is really good, of just why we're investing that money, so that there's a goal and that everybody understands what the return on investment is going to be, not only for the investment from a dollars perspective, but also you need to think about the fact that you're going to go into this as a project and it's going to take up resource time. Mm-hmm. And so as you kind of plan that technology transformation, one thing I highly recommend is thinking through not just the technology, but the people and process first, and then applying the technology to those people and processes to really help align the entire organization for the end goal, and making sure you're taking on kind of the appropriate amount of a project that you can actually meet with that phase one. A lot of times people will take on too much or not really plan out the people and process enough to align so that there's actually return on investment. So you really need to hit a happy medium of what technology you're implementing, and then also make sure you do not forget about the alignment of people and process as you're making those shifts.
Super helpful, Nick. And maybe even digging into that a little bit more, could you give some maybe like really specific examples of if a company was like, okay, we're ready to start this NetSuite implementation process, like what are the things that you think should be in place, whether it's from like a team or a process perspective, in order for them to have a smooth, I'm going to say smooth as possible, right, transition onto NetSuite, and to really like set themselves up for success?
Yeah, so I'll use a specific example that we see a lot. Over the last 10 years, e-commerce companies, e-commerce first companies have really grown over the last 10 years. And so what we're seeing in the NetSuite space is a lot of those companies maturing and looking for ERP systems, where historically they were, on QuickBooks. They were transitioning that their inventory systems were completely separate from their financial systems. So their accounting teams were completely separate from their operations teams. As you go in to start evaluating an ERP system, those two teams become now linked, right? And they now are looking to have the e-commerce transactions actually generate the GL impacts from the financial team. So making sure that now, those teams have always kind of been separate. The accounts are essentially kind of the scorekeepers, right? At the end of the day, they kind of amount everything up, and there's really not connection between those teams. So starting to have the discussions of making sure you're bringing in the right subject matter experts, the right business owners from the accounting team, syncing them up in that example with kind of the e-commerce and operations as well as customer service to make sure that those processes, like those e-commerce transactions, those returns that are processing, all of those operations that really are disconnected today, looking to connect them to the accounting and financial backend, making sure that there's alignment by those teams of what those processes are going to be, and how they're going to implement that technology to really improve that as they go forward.
Can I comment on that, Lyndsey? Because
Yes, please.
he's absolutely right. One of the things that I experienced in one of the implementations, it just kind of, you triggered a little tremor there in my heart, like, oh, you're absolutely right there, because one of the problems that I've seen is that you have these two departments and they don't even know how much their department impacts accounting. I hear it a lot. Well, I didn't even know that that had to do with accounting. And it's because they've been separate entities inside of the same business, and the non-linking of that. One of the things that I've recommended over several implementations is, as you write out what your processes are, when you say we send that piece of paper to such and such, and then you let it go, making sure that you include that idea, that understanding in your implementation, that when that piece of paper goes off to another department, you're now linking in NetSuite. That's the linking transaction that you're doing, and keeping that in the forefront of what's happening in the process world. Because one thing about small business, or any business that has retail divisions all over the place, you tend to not think that we are a connected entity. And it's really important that we keep that in the forefront, that we are on the same team, yes. But like in my case with the 13 different retail stores, they all had different processes, even though they were the same company, because they worked what was best for them instead of what was best for the company. So Nick's very right. It's really making sure that that link happens between the departments. It's very important.
Yeah. The one thing that I feel like is kind of connected between these two questions, Nick, you were mentioning figuring out the right investment, right? And a lot of people, I think, look at a NetSuite investment as like a one-time cost. And what we see a lot is there's an ongoing cost that you have to price in, whether that be resources personally or tech resources to kind of maintain all of these things, or both. Do you guys have any thoughts on where you've seen, I know, LaVette, you guys have invested on making sure your implementation goes forward very successfully. And Nick, I know that you guys kind of come in the midst of things and help people along on things that maybe are walking on one foot. Do you guys have thoughts on ways to help people invest in maybe after phase one has gone live, and like getting into that, like we're live now, how do we make this a successful go live ongoing?
Ooh.
Yeah, I could maybe take a first swipe at that. So from an investment perspective, you really kind of need to think about this as like an extension of your resource and your employees, right? So it is not just a system. It is, like you mentioned, it's not a one-time fee. This becomes part of the overall operations of your company as you scale. And one thing I think is good to consider and mention, and that often gets missed, is that the ERP is usually the nucleus, the core system of record, but it's generally not the only investment you're making as you're making this digital transformation journey. It's generally a piece of an ecosystem that you're implementing. So working with a partner that's got experience in what those kind of best solutions are out there that you may need as an ecosystem, understanding those process flows, like I mentioned, and then linking in what technology you're going to be using those different transactions or systems for. LaVette brought up a good point about passing a piece of paper. Well, that piece of paper may be a pick slip that's going to your warehouse that is a 3PL. That 3PL is generally not going to be operating your NetSuite system. It's going to be on something else. So there are different technology platforms that you're going to be leveraging to move those transactions through the process. So making sure you understand all of those systems, what the cost is going to be from a subscription side, as well as just, from an ongoing support standpoint, whether you guys hire internally or you use a outsourced resource model where you have a managed service team that helps support those technology stacks, including that in your budget as you move forward. But I generally look at those as being, especially as you scale, it's overall, it's kind of part of the company's operation and general expenses. And so, budgeting for that is really good, but also thinking about it as kind of the core operations is a good way to think about it on an ongoing basis. Whereas the initial implementation is going to be a one-time fee. Those costs can kind of be associated with that technology transformation, but the ongoing cost is going to be, something to consider from a budget perspective.
One of the things that I've said over the years, and it just came to me again, one of the things that's lovely about NetSuite is its ability to be customized. One of NetSuite's downfalls is its ability to be customized. I mean, that's just the reality of it. Because every department has what they want. Every department wants what they want, and they want it to make it easier. And I think one of the factors that don't get considered in not just the financial decision to go on to NetSuite is, what is it going to cost me time-wise? Because Nick said it previously, there is the return on your investment for time, because you have people that have invested their time in making the system what it is. And after Lyndsey and I were talking about this, after go live, you think, oh, it's the answer. We've done it. We've succeeded now. And this is when it really starts costing, because the trainer approach has to happen where you've learned the system. You have to be able to train your other users and have buy-in into that system as well. And I think that's one of the things that can be an issue for an example that Nick brought up was the 3PL. You're absolutely right. What are we going to do to link these systems now? Because there's that cost. Another situation that I'm currently working with now is, you have your vendor bills. Brian, I'm calling you all the time. Okay, we've got this vendor now, and we've got something we need to do to link that to NetSuite. And not every bill pay application works properly with NetSuite. I mean, there's just so many things that you need to consider. The wallet doesn't close after go live, and that's something time-wise or dollar value. It doesn't, you have to consider making your system best. But at the same time, I would say, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, Nick, but I would say, don't be so quick to customize first. See how well the system will work for you, and then make that decision after you get the process down what you actually need. So
I'm gonna record that, LaVette, and play that at the beginning of every implementation. No, I 100% agree. I think people are quick to invest in new systems and then recreate the exact process that they do today. And there's some reason for that. They know it. There's a bit of a safety net in the current processes being recreated in a new system, but fully agree, trying to take the approach of use the system the way it's intended, follow the process flows that are intended through kind of that overall technology stack, and then really kind of customize where the business is really specific or has kind of its special sauce. So generally think about companies being 80% out of the box and 20% special. That 20% generally is going to consume 80% of the conversations. But you need to try to make sure that you don't customize for that 80%. You follow the standard bill pay process. I'll use AP as an example. I'm always pushing companies to keep as standard as possible for an AP process, because it shouldn't be unique in most scenarios. I can think of a couple examples that would be different, but in general, like the AP process, especially for kind of non-product based bills, is generally pretty standard across organizations. So trying to look for those opportunities to keep standard processes as robust as possible, and then customizing where that the business has got some specific requirements that are going to require it.
right.
Awesome. And I think you both touched on this concept of like ongoing maintenance, right? Like once NetSuite gets stood up. And so maybe the next question, and Nick, maybe we can start with you, is, when do you think it makes sense for a company to engage an external partner or consultant to help with the NetSuite implementation? Sort of what should they be looking for in a partner?
Yeah, it somewhat depends on the maturity of the company. So a younger company that's kind of looking to do some of the analysis, the decisions on what technology stacks may be a bit simpler. They may be able to make those decisions on their own and then pull in the partner to kind of help with implementing it and actually execution of it. A more mature company coming off of more mature processes may have a global footprint, those companies really should probably have a partner help support them in the system selection and phasing process to really discuss that strategy of how and what systems they're going to implement for those processes, because that gets pretty complex pretty quick, especially as you have more ingrained processes with larger workforces. It's really, uncommon that those organizations have the experts in-house to be able to make those decisions and map those future processes out. And really, I would recommend in that scenario, bringing in a partner to help with those decisions. In a younger company, as I mentioned, you may know that you need to go to NetSuite, you may have Shopify, you may have a 3PL. That all may be pretty straightforward. You can go through the kind of processes with kind of a sales related cycle, and then have that partner help you implement. But I would say that, no matter what, reaching out to the partner network to ask some questions like we're giving you now is generally something you can do at no cost. And those organizations are willing to have those discussions of what they would recommend. And I would always highly recommend, leveraging those experts' opinions on what to do and what not to do.
For sure.
Yeah, and LaVette, maybe to you. So you obviously are in-house at Sunday Riley. How do you think about it? Where this is where a company could really use an in-house full-time resource.
I figured it out when I figured out that I don't know what I don't know. I need a partner because I don't know. And in various times that I've even called on Blue Onion, in fact, I don't know that I don't know this process isn't working for me until I reach out, and when the questions are asked in discovery, what is it that you're looking for? That there is a solution where I'm racking my brain trying to figure it out in-house. There's a solution for this. Nick mentioned Shopify and the 3PL. We're in that situation currently now, but I've been on the other side in the corporate arena where I've worked for a corporate IT team, and we've had to, we've got all the, the dollar value on payroll is up there, and we've got all the right people in place, but we have figured out that we don't know this specific system, so we have to call out and get a partner. And I think part of that is being relieved that the partner has experienced what I've experienced on many different levels and will have an answer. And if not, at least have resources available for me to reach out to. Maybe I don't hire that partner, but they begin to ask some questions in discovery that really make you think. We need to reach out, and because we are looking at it from a technical perspective only, but we're not looking at it from what partnerships can offer and what other platforms can offer to us. And on the smaller side of business, we are looking at it from, yes, we have this and we can run these individually, but we don't know how to link these things. And a partner can look at it and say, hey, there is, for example, one of the major integrators, connectors, there's a way to integrate all of these systems together, that you're not thinking about that, because really your vision as a small business is just get the problem solved. Just put this one fire out. If we could just get this fire out, we'll be ahead. When really putting out that fire may cause another fire. And so you have to figure out, well, the partner will help you integrate getting all the fires put out and making everything work in sync with each other. So I'm going to say, when do you reach out? When you figure out, I can't, I think I can, but I can't. It's time to go out.
Awesome. All right. Switching
Just to
gears.
throw in
Oh, go ahead, Brian.
one quick
Yeah.
thing there, Lyndsey, is I'll say that's one thing that we've really experienced in the limited time we've been in the NetSuite arena, is just that it is a very cohesive network, right? There's a good ecosystem of like meeting people to say, hey, yes, I've seen this problem, I haven't seen this problem. So to Nick's suggestion of like, reach out to a partner, take a free conversation of like, hey, these are the problems that you normally see in the landscape, build that network and meet people in different spaces. Because like LaVette said, we talk to each other frequently of just say, like, what would you do in this situation? How would you address this problem? And just kind of troubleshoot off of each other. So I think that network is really helpful.
Awesome. All right. Switching gears to the actual implementation process. So, and LaVette, maybe we'll start with you, but what are some, whether like tips, recommendations, best practices, that you can share to companies for effectively managing and coordinating, the tasks during implementation, any, I guess, things that maybe you wish you had known before your first, maybe that's a very loaded question, but before your first NetSuite implementation?
This might mean something different to every person, but I'm going to say discovery. And I'm going to say, if I could beat it with a hammer and kill it, discovery, discovery, discovery. Like I said, you don't know what you don't know. I'll use myself as an example and Nick as say he would be my consultant to come in. Nick's going to come and he's going to ask me, okay, what does your business do in this area? And because Nick is a consultant and he's sitting there, I'm going to act like I know exactly what he's talking about and I'm going to give him the answer because my boss is sitting here and I need to show him that I know what I'm doing, right? I told you this before, Lyndsey, and there is no question that should not be asked in discovery. If you think it, ask it. Your consultant will tell you what they are recommending that is best for you. I think one of the things that as a small business or even a large business, because we did it in corporate as well, is that we don't know. We have to recognize that we don't know what we don't know. And so you need to have this conversation in discovery that is asking questions. What will happen if I do this? And what will happen if I do that? And this is what we do. Not taking the smallest task and thinking that that's too small. Making sure that you're mentioning the things that you don't talk about every day, but you do it every day by rote. I think that's really important that the discovery process is so detailed. The other thing I'm going to say is pre-implementation. When you choose your consulting partner, let them be your best friend. Don't fight them. You need to become really acquainted. And I know that it's going to get frustrating because they're going to ask you the same question in various ways. They'll flip it upside down. And this is because they're trying to get a scope of what is it? Who are you? And while you're trying to discover who they are, and they're trying to discover who you are, if you're fighting against each other, it just makes the process more difficult. So I would say from my experience, from my first implementation, if I had known how important discovery was, I would have asked more questions. I would have gone into detail more on what's going to happen after go live, what happens during go live. When I get close and my adrenaline is failing and I just want to quit, what do I do? All of those things, it's really, really important before you implement. It's important to get those questions answered, really becoming, getting acquainted with your partner, asking him, can he or she, can you recommend somebody that I can call and get some questions answered? I think that's really, really important before implementation.
Awesome. And Nick, maybe same question to you, and also maybe what do you wish that your clients knew, during the process of implementation?
Yeah, I could spend our hour on just kind of implementation methodology and discussion, but I think for the purposes of kind of preparation of going into an implementation and kind of do's and don'ts, what I'd recommend asking the question of what is the partner's methodology and how are you supporting us through the implementation during the sales cycle, and make sure you really understand what they're saying about that. Not all implementations are the same. They are, the support packages and how they're planning on implementing you can be very different based on the approach. And so depending on the methodology, depending on the approach to the implementation, the responsibility can be much more on the partner or it can be much more on the company. So there's a decision there by the organization on investment. I think it's good to make sure you have eyes wide open going into that there are differences. As you kind of select, and I'm going to use the more hands-on approach from the consultant as the path for the point of this discussion. If the consultant is taking more of a leading role, LaVette brought up really good points around discovery, making sure you are going in with kind of a partnership mindset on we're going in to achieve a goal together. And none of it's going to happen if either the partner doesn't come through or the client doesn't come through. That both are responsible parties for getting the implementation done properly and well. I will go back to the kind of people, process, and technology a bit. One of the most important things at the beginning and getting into that discovery phase, as LaVette mentioned, is getting the right people in the room for that consultant to ask the questions to is the responsibility of the executive leadership and sponsorship that's putting together this implementation. If you get the wrong person in the room answering those questions, they're going to answer them the best way they can. I think LaVette brought up a good point. Like they're going to answer it because they want to know that process, but they may be only answering it from their own lens. So if I'm asking a controller how the order to cash process works, and I don't talk to somebody in operations, I may completely miss the fact that there is a returns process out here that nobody even knows about. So making sure you bring the right people into the room that are answering the questions that's leading to a solution that's going to work for the entire organization is really important. Leaning on the partner's methodology and not fighting against that methodology is also very important. You hired that expert because they've got experience in that implementation. Hopefully you made the right choice on which direction to go, but regardless, it's going to be better if you kind of go through their process as opposed to making a new one. One that the partner's all of a sudden not going to know how to implement the way you're asking them to. And, frankly, you kind of hired them to have that expertise, let them do the job. So I would say going in with those two things would probably be most important. The other piece that I think is really instrumental to the overall success is adoption. And so if you don't get the right people in the room to answer the questions, you're not going to have advocates for the system when it goes live. And really, unless those people are advocating for the system to be successful when it goes live, you're going to have a very bumpy road. And so as you go into this implementation, identifying who you want to have as advocates for the system, getting them included early, not only because they're the subject matter expert, but because you're going to lean on them as you get closer to go live to really drive that adoption through the organization. So thinking through kind of what people that we want to put in, making sure you align on process, and then ultimately, investing together to get the technology aligned with the partner is kind of a recipe for success that I've seen work very well.
Can I comment on that?
Yes, please.
And Nick, I'd like to ask you a question as well. When you realize that you don't have buy-in, and you've got a deadline for go live, and months are ticking by, and you realize we don't have buy-in, what do you recommend to the company that won't swap out the SME for the person who actually knows this will work for us if you knew this? What do you recommend? You're smiling because you probably dealt with that before.
Yeah, we've definitely dealt with it before. It's a challenging situation to be put in, especially as you mentioned, if there's just a block there that they're not willing to pull those people in. I will say generally the best method that I use is something that actually is a term that is used more in literary terms, but it's show it, don't tell it. And one of the things that you can do with a system implementation is you can tell somebody how it's going to work and get buy-in from that by just having a conversation, but there's not really awareness. So by showing the system of how it works, generally it does get those executive sponsors to pull those people in, because all of a sudden they're like, oh, I don't know the question you're asking about what field needs to be on this return authorization. I need to pull this person in. If you just talk about the returns process and don't show it, commonly you run into the scenario where you just mentioned, where it's like, well, I don't want that person answering that question because I want it to operate the way the system does. And so commonly, by flipping the script a little bit, getting a show and tell as part of that discovery process, I find that we have a bit more success in bringing in the right people, which ultimately, from my perspective, is really required to be successful.
Right.
Is it the same, Nick? I mean, I know you and I have kind of spoken about some customers who maybe went into an implementation, and we talked about having buy-in from both sides, like operational buy-in versus like maybe financial accounting team buy-in. And we've seen a lot where maybe one side was the champion and the other didn't get on board. So like your operations kind of got on board, you have all that running through, but then for the GL impact, the accounting team's backing out all of the order level stuff and just layering on summary journal entries or something like that, right? And so do you have the same or different advice for someone who's maybe done an implementation that one side has buy-in, but another doesn't? And how do you get everybody on board?
Yeah, that's an awesome topic. Actually, I would recommend the exact same thing. Even if it is a live company, one of the things I've actually seen and done, I've taken live transactions processing through a production system, put them into a sequential process flow, and then walked multiple departments that have a buy-in, a need for those transactions, to align those teams on what exactly is happening. And it's happening in their production system today. It's actually operating. They really don't need a consultant to do that. But commonly, there's just not a connective bond between those departments and those scenarios. And so literally walking through and showing them, this is how this transaction is processing. This is the GL impact to this. This is what your warehouse team is doing. This is what your customer service team is doing. So kind of process flow translated to the actual transactions that is on the operational side, and then also showing how that translates to the accounting team, I think is a great way, even in a live environment with troubles, to be able to show that and then iterate as needed, right? Sometimes it's actually doesn't need any iteration. It only needs awareness. So that first step is kind of awareness, and then, stop, does it need to be changed? Yes, what needs to be changed now that you have full awareness of what that process is? And then make changes not based on kind of one department's instinct on what needs to happen, but a holistic view of the overall process, the technology, and then ultimately kind of aligning the people to what that process is.
And Nick, maybe I'll ask you, and then LaVette, I'll ask you a little bit of a loaded question. So I'm going to say, how long does the implementation process typically take? And the reason I ask this is because we're always talking to companies that maybe are in the midst of an implementation process, and they're like, hey, like our go live is June 1st. And we're like, great. And then we'll check in with them and they're like, our go live is August 1st, right? And so how, and Nick, you also sort of referred to phases earlier in the call too. So like, how do you think about, is it different phases? How long does the process take? And maybe as part of that, when things go off the rails from like a timeline perspective, like, are there commonalities there that you see? And maybe it goes back to the discovery process, but would love to hear your thoughts on sort of overall timing.
Yeah. So I'll kind of phrase this in a couple of different ways, because I don't know all the companies on. So if you are a company that is implementing NetSuite financials, you're not connecting it to outside systems. You're using it for kind of AP and AR functionality and recording your financials really kind of manually. I would say planning for 3 months is probably adequate. That's a very fast implementation, but also it's pretty narrow in scope. As you begin to include other systems, and I'll use kind of the examples that I've already given for an e-commerce business where you have Shopify and a 3PL, maybe EDI with your wholesale partners. Those implementations, because you've got multiple systems, are going to take longer, because not only are you kind of going through what you did in that 3-month process, now you got to layer on those integration development time to those other systems, and then all the testing and everything that occurs after that. Generally, those are going to start at about 6 months. 6 months is, a common integration, like Shopify to NetSuite is a common integration. It doesn't mean it's simple. It just means it's common. And there are pre-existing connections and accelerators out there that can make that 6-month timeline a reality. As you bring into the picture any sort of custom on-premise systems, I'll use a manufacturing company as an example of this. They've got their own manufacturing process. They've got a home-built system that they have. Now you're talking about a much more volatile timeline that can go from 9 months to 24 months. And the reason for that is that as you have systems that may or may not fit systematic ERP systems, and you're building custom integrations, there may be changes that need to happen to those kind of custom built solutions that are much more complex. So it's not just the ERP implementation now you've got other systems that require development. There may be more process changes that are known that need to be kind of developed. And really, that's where we see those dramatic slides in timeline. And that's all talking about it from the technology side. The other big impact to timeline is resource availability. Commonly, we see this in the retail space. We've got blackouts between holiday season to the new year. We've got a plan to go live on August 1, but if we don't hit that, now we're sliding all the way to February. And that's not due to the technology constraints. It's that all of a sudden all the resources that I rely on for my busy season are taken up, and I'm not going to launch a new system on Black Friday, right?
Yeah.
For good reason.
That happens.
Yeah, it happens, but I would argue against it considerably. So, there is the resource side and the technology side. I know that was a long-winded answer, but it gives you some guide on what to expect.
Awesome. Yeah, LaVette would love to.
Absolutely. Hands down, I agree. Absolutely. And I think another piece of advice would be, and don't try to implement another go live as you're going live with your ERP system. Please don't try to be the miracle worker and do two at one time. It really becomes just a point of frustration for yourself and for your employees. I think it's really important, and Nick, if you disagree, please let me know. I think it's very, very important when you see burnout that you acknowledge it, because when your employees are fried because you don't have the bandwidth to cover the implementation and continue with the day-to-day, you have to consider what are we going to do to keep people moving and motivated to keep this going. While go live is the goal, it's not to the point of you're losing people quitting because they don't want. One of the things that I've known in the many implementations that I've done is that change is hard for people. Most of the time, the process is I went out, I bought a piece of land, I'm going to rebuild my old house. We're not doing that. We bought a piece of land and we're going to build a new house. And in that implementation process, it will require, you may need new tools. And when you start seeing people burn out, you have to acknowledge that and not get to the point where, no, we have 6 months to get this done. And I'm not saying to open your wallet and let them come in and, just spend every dollar, but be considerate of the people that after go live, you have to work with these employees as well. If you don't have that buy-in, and if that goal is time only and not consideration of the humans that are going to make this work, I think you will, what you reap is that's not what you're going to want. I think it's really important, but I think his timelines are accurate. Financial implementations are very much smaller time frame than, especially in the integration. It can be frustrating, and you're always updating, because even when you're going through the implementation, something will come up that wasn't brought up in discovery, and you have to give time for that as well. So it's really important.
I'd agree. Go ahead, Brian.
You go for it.
So I'd agree, LaVette. I would take a minimalist approach to what is required for phase one. The only thing I would add to that is that commonly, especially in some of the e-commerce and retail spaces, we see that NetSuite on its own isn't really going to meet phase one requirements. So there may be multiple systems you're implementing as part of that phase one tech stack, but agreed. And analyze whether they are required in that phase one or not, and try to bite off as little as possible to kind of go with a phased approach, acknowledging the fact that you may need, for instance, a WMS to go live with. If you don't have one today, there may be two systems going live at once, but it's really one ecosystem. So, it's something that you should spend time on up front and make sure that you've got a really sound plan for that. And that's, again, kind of going back to when to pull in a partner. When you're talking about those strategies, that is a very good time to pull in some people that have got some expertise in that, to be able to kind of sound those ideas off and make sure that your plan, or that their plan is going to align with what your goals are.
Yeah. my question was kind of a solutions oriented one around this problem, right? We're kind of talking about there's different levers we can use to try to find solutions to these problems, to avoid burnout with our team if we're working with a limited team. But we have there's a real influx of work that has to happen when you're implementing a GL system or an ERP. And so I'm just curious, Nick, we've kind of talked about this in a separate conversation, but like, are there partner-based solutions where you can increase your person power, right? Like you add more people to your workforce to kind of meet that increased need for time? Or is it a better solution in a lot of cases to just extend your implementation time to allow for some of these things? Like, I'm sure there's some path-dependent answers there, but just curious are there solutions like that where you can add, people power to your workforce temporarily through RSM or other partners and do things like that? Or is it better to just extend your timeline and do it with your own people?
So from an implementation side, you can't augment the people that are answering the questions about the company, because it really needs to be the team that is working on that. So I'll answer this in kind of two ways. One is during the implementation, if you're going to augment staff, augment the daily tasks of your subject matter experts to free them up, to give them more time. So if you've got an AP person that's going to be involved in a 9-month implementation process, they're going to be really kind of heavily involved in that. What can you get off of their plate that is part of their daily activities that can be taught and, delegated to, paying the bills, approving AP up to a certain price, right? Like going through all those activities and then freeing that person up to be more involved in the implementation. From a solutions perspective of kind of staff augmentation, I always feel like this gets asked to me. And one of the things that I will say is a reality, and I'll be pragmatic about this, is that I commonly, if never, see a technology system implemented and an entire department no longer needed. Like, it's just not something I ever see. Usually what happens is that the company's already running at a deficit. They're putting so much pressure on those departments that they're really stretched thin, and they're not able to do all of the things that they should be doing. They're not forecasting. They're not, doing cash projections. They're doing the necessary tasks to be able to run the business. And it's almost like reactive task management. Implementing those systems should, if done properly, elevate the output from those team members with the same amount of time and allow them to focus more on some areas that are more strategic in nature than task-based. And so, generally that's what I see as the value in these, and the return on investment is generally not a staff reduction, but an increase in output, and, delegating some of those tasks to a system, and then, really allowing those resources to focus more on some initiatives that are, not attended to currently.
Awesome. And just as a reminder to everyone participating, if you guys have any questions, please do put them in the chat and we can pick those up as we go. But sort of in these last 8 minutes, switching to the post NetSuite implementation. So LaVette, I know we were chatting about this before, that, you sometimes are just like, all right, the go live date, like success, but there's a lot that comes after that. So LaVette, would love to just maybe hear your experience and again, any recommendations or tips that you have for, okay, we're live, sort of now what? And sort of what does success mean, after that go live date?
Oh, success is we're actually working together now. I was telling Lyndsey on a side call that we've in several instances, you go live and you have this adrenaline crash because this date has been coming, and now it's here. And you, for forever, you've been talking about process and working together, but now the reality of that working together has to happen. And one of the things that I think that is very, very frustrating is the exposure, the awareness of having to communicate with other departments that you weren't doing that with before because you were not linked together before. You could send off an email, or the or you could send off this piece of paper and you thought it was all over. Just because you go live does not mean that the party's over. There's a lot of, now you have to work what you've put in place. And now, like a gear, it all has to come together and continue to work, and it has to work every day. And I think the most frustrating part is that people don't understand, we as people, we don't like change. We like to be comfortable in where we're at. And now the change is in your face and you have to do it. You have to work through all of that process with the frustration of the system isn't doing what I thought it was going to do. There's the 3-step forward mentality and 15 steps backward. That's very frustrating. It's so frustrating. There's the eye-opening, I thought we resolved that, and we didn't resolve that. I think it's very important and to keep your partner involved in post. And sometimes that post go live can be, they'll give you months, or that, you set up support for how many months that you want support for, but stay in contact with them and write down questions of things that are not happening the way that you thought it was going to happen. Make sure that you're visiting your processes that you put in place in Discovery, you put in place for go live, you've tested it, but now we're live and it's 3 months later and it's not working because we missed this step. Constantly keeping communication open between the departments. I think that's very important. Going back to the drawing board and saying, hey, that didn't work as a process during testing because either the person wasn't there or, something will always come up that's very, very frustrating. But I think communicating, a lot of communication is required between your departments to keep the process of the system is going to work for us one day. We're going to be successful at this, to keep that at the forefront of your mind and not get discouraged by the fact that it's not working tomorrow just because it went go live. Post go live can be, to me, is equally as frustrating as just moving towards that date. It can be frustrating, but the process of understanding that, like, I was telling Lyndsey, here we are a year down the road at this current company that I'm at, we're a year down the road and we still are having some issues of process. And I think that we just have to keep it in front of us that as we work together, we write it down and keep moving forward, reaching out to the Bryans. Hey, this came up. It's something that we have to do. I have to make that call. And what's your opinion? Get in a community, a user community, and see what other people are doing. I think that's really important as well.
And Nick, maybe same question for you from the consultant perspective too.
Yeah, and I think one thing to keep in mind as the executive sponsor is that this implementation is a lot on your team, and so as you hit those for that go live, celebrate it. It's a win, right? No matter how bumpy it's going to be afterwards, like there was significant time and effort put into, those folks running 2 jobs essentially during this. And so, celebrating that win, acknowledging those folks that have been part of that, it'll do 2 things. 1, they deserve it. 2, it'll help with kind of that adoption and keeping that energy level up as they kind of embark in the next part of this, which frankly is the important part, right? Now you're operating. So making sure you celebrate that, I think, is really important. The other piece is properly setting expectations coming into the system so that, a bumpy road is expected, right? We're changing a lot of things. We've got people that aren't aware of the processes. We're going to have some training related hurdles with this change. Setting those expectations can help a lot. Because it can really set you up for people expecting it going in, which is going to make any problems that come up less dramatic as those first 6 weeks to 6 months, frankly, go through and the organization changes. The other piece is, I would just say is, and LaVette hit on this perfectly, is communication is instrumental. So we talked about the fact that the departments have been separate a lot of times in these technology changes until this happens. You now need to make sure that you plan a communication strategy between those departments, whether that's, a weekly check-in cross department, or you've got daily stand-ups for the first 2 weeks where all of the department heads sit in, even if they just say hi and goodbye, there's no problems. It opens the communication channel up so that there's just not frustration in pockets with no plan in place to resolve issues timely. And so I think if you really kind of go into those with those 3 things, you're going to really kind of keep the morale up. You're going to keep the communication going between departments, and then ultimately you're going to have people with proper expectations going into it to really lower any concerns as you hit the inevitable bumpy road with all those changes.
I think what I'm struck by, which we've seen in a lot of our customers as well, is having an internal champion with the right soft skills to manage everyone and help everyone along through this process is probably one of the most valuable things you can have on your team. That's
Awesome. Awesome. LaVette, Nick, I know we have 1 minute left. Thank you both so much. I'm like, this is so helpful, I know, to me, but also to our audience who's been asking, about this topic for so long. So we want to thank you guys. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And to everybody that is, in the audience, thank you guys. We hope that you found this webinar to be helpful. We are looking to host more community events, both virtual and potentially in person in the future. So if there are other topics that would be interesting or helpful to you guys, please do let us know. And then finally, if you are interested in learning more about Blue Onion and, from Nick's side for RSM, please do reach out. We'll also be sending emails after the webinar with information and points of contact. So thank you everybody so much. Nick, LaVette, thank you guys so much. So wonderful to have you guys join us.
Pleasure. Thank you, Lyndsey. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.